we summarize what we discussed yesterday, Rinpoche says that what we want to do is to analyze how things appear to our mind in the way that the mind perceives the things. So there are two aspects here. First, what appears to us, and then the way that we perceive it, that we grasp that which appears to the mind. So we do. It is not enough for us just to deal with the way things appear to us. We want to go beyond that and ask ourselves whether things exist as they appear. So phenomena appears to us as though they are objective, as though they exist within the object itself. We cannot stop this appearance, and it is not our aim. We do not want to stop what appears to us. So the only thing that we can do is to ask ourselves whether things exist as they appear. Do they exist objectively within the object itself? So we cannot stop the appearances, and we can say that this is how things exist conventionally, how they are accepted to be, because when we look at the way things exist conventionally, the way we live, if we stay too long in the sun, we will get burnt. So this is how things exist in our conventional reality, and we do not want to block these appearances. These are manifest phenomena, and if anyone tries to go against this manifest phenomena that we all experience, so this person will not be a valid person. So if a teacher comes here, and he will be like a valid being, and if this teacher claims that which is contradictory to us, that which appears to us, so actually this teacher will not teach us valid things. He will not be a valid being. So our intention is not to stop appearances, but rather not be satisfied with the appearance, the mere appearance, and to go beyond it, and to deal with the way the mind perceives and even clings these appearances as though they exist objectively. So when we think about this idea of not being satisfied with a mere appearance and rather going beyond it, so for example, when JHADO Rinpoche is sitting in front of us now, it seems like it is exactly the same person who was sitting here yesterday, with a certain permanence that doesn't change. But JHADO Rinpoche, who is sitting in front of us, is a being that is going through constant change from moment to moment, and in the same way, we can think of different things that we encounter every day, good or bad things. Something good, which we saw yesterday, will look bad today, and something bad will look good today. And some things just seem neutral, and they seem as though they haven't changed from yesterday, but everything has got this momentary change. We have some expectations from people. For example, an enemy seems, it appears to our mind as though it isn't changing and is independent, but also an enemy and others exist independent on other things. But in general, in our daily activities, we do not see this dependency. We do not see how things are dependent on each other. The appearance in our mind is objective within the object itself. We can check this with our own experience. If we search how things really appear to us, as though they exist within the object in an objective way, and not in dependence or in comparison to other things, but rather in the object itself. The Dalai Lama tried to explain how things appear to us, and then we grasp or we apprehend them. We apprehend this appearance as though it exists objectively in reality. Rinpoche says he just doesn't know whether he can explain it in a very clear way, but he will try. So in the daily life, when we think about emptiness and selflessness, and we try to investigate it with our own experience, so we ask, what is the benefit of contemplating about emptiness with a selflessness? So we can check it in a way we relate to. Let's say we go shopping, and we go to a shop that has got all kind of home things, and there is a bowl that has got a beautiful shape and a nice color, and when the shopkeeper explains about this bowl. They say what a famous factory that it came from, or a very skilled clay pot maker. And then suddenly, while they're explaining, the shopkeeper explains it falls to the ground. So since we haven't paid for it yet, so it's a shame, but we don't really care. But if we buy this beautiful bowl that has got a lovely color and a beautiful shape, and we take the bowl home, and then when we open the box and the bowl will fall to the floor, so then there will come a particular feeling of loss. Because at that moment the bowl already belongs to us. So this feeling of loss, of oh, what a pity, something terrible happened. So it depends. This feeling depends whether something belongs to us or doesn't. Once it is mine, I have a particular feeling, a particular response that arises in the mind. As for the bowl itself, it's the same bowl. It could be that when we look at the shape and the color of the bowl in our mind, these aspects of the bowl seem as though they exist objectively, that it is a magnificent color objectively. The shape is glorious just from its own side, objectively. And once it belongs to us, once we did the transaction of paying for the bowl, so what happens to these objective things that exist to us? It causes a mental attitude, a mental response. So if we think of this example, and then we look at our own mind, our own body, and things that belong to us, so what we're dealing with here is checking how the mind apprehends the self and what belongs to the self. That which is mine is not only the bowl, but it's also my own body and my own mind. And we have, as the users, as the ones who are using this body, mind, or bowl, we're using these means. So the mind apprehends these things that it owns as though they're objective. And that which belongs to the self also seems to be objective, as though they exist from their own side. So since particular things happen, then the mind relates to what happens while grasping to things as existing objectively. So pain and suffering, they appear, they exist. So this is what Rinpoche wanted to explain to us, a kind of a summary of what we spoke about yesterday. Rinpoche said he doesn't know if this description is satisfying or clear, but this is how we respond to particular situations, with first grasping to the self, and also grasping to what belongs to the self. Chandrakirti, the great scholar, said in engaging in the middle way, by seeing that all obscuring states of mind, they come in dependence on the perishing collection. So the yogi,
having seen that all afflictions arise from the view of the perishing collection, the yogi refutes the self.
So that which Chandrakirti spoken about. He said that every day we go through the afflictive emotions. Sometimes we're very angry, we have grasping. At other times we have pride and jealousy in our mind. So then we go through a variety of states of mind. And if we look for this, for the cause for all these afflictive emotions, it is ignorance, which is the view of the transitory collection. So when the yogi understands this, he meditates about trying to annihilate this self. So when the Dalai Lama speaks about it in the way that Chandrakirti did, he says not to be satisfied in the way that things appear to us every day in the daily life. The way things appear to us in an objective way, this is what we need to go against. So the way the things seem to appear, they appear as though they exist from the side of the object, and we cling to it like that, and that is when great attachment, desire arises. This is good, this is bad, this is what I need, this is what I don't need. So all these afflictive emotions, they arise in dependence on clinging to phenomena as though they exist objectively.
Among
So, as we said with the example that Rinpoche told us about the ball, so things appear as though they are objectively existent, but they do not exist like that, but rather they exist in dependence on causes and conditions, on parts and on imputation. But still we completely cling to their objective existence. So when Chandrakirti says that a yogi goes against the self, here we need to understand two kinds of self. There is a self that exists. The yogi doesn't go against the self that exists. We exist by mere independence on mere label. This is not what the yogi goes against. This self is a conventionally existent. So the yogi that the self that the yogi goes against is the self that exists objectively. That seems to exist objectively. As we said yesterday, the self to be gotten rid of is a self that seems to us to truly exist, like this fear when we're swept away with a river, or when a dog runs after us trying to bite us. So there is this immense fear, and this is what we want to check, this appearance of the self that comes up to mind. So there's an appearance of a self, of I, that it seems as though existing within the object itself, and this is what the I grasps to, the self grasps to. So it's not the I that exists in dependence on label that we want to refute. So the I that we want to refute is the I that exists on the basis of the body and mind, which are indivisible. Our body and mind, from the beginning, we can say, from the starting point, is that they're not indivisible. They can be divided. But the way it appears to us, the way the I appears to us, and the way we grasp to it, it as though the I exists in body and mind, which are indivisible. So this is how we speak about it, and we don't want to be just satisfied with an intellectual discussion that uses a lot of words. We want to listen to the words, to think about them, and then to try and check in our daily lives, to sit and to generate this experience of seeing how the appearance of things to exist objectively, and how the mind truly believes and grasps to this objective appearance. So in the Heart Sutra, which we begin with every morning, it is said, there is no eye, ear, etc. And before that, the Heart Sutra says, so how should a child of the lineage train who wishes to engage in the practice of the profound perfection of wisdom? So when it says there is no eye, ear, etc., it doesn't mean that eye and ear do not exist conventionally. It doesn't mean that the conventional existence is refuted, but rather what the Heart Sutra refutes is the existence in an objective way of these things from their own side, by their own nature, by their own power. This is what the Heart Sutra refutes. So when it says, look at these 5 aggregates also as so in other countries like Korea, China, this the word also has got a particular meaning. When the Heart Sutra says, look thoroughly also at these 5 aggregates, this word also means that we want to also first look at ourselves as individuals and to check our own appearance, and to understand that there is an objective appearance as though we exist by our own power, by our own nature, as though we exist inherently existent, in an inherent existence. So it's not only that this appearance comes to mind, but we also grasp to it, as though we truly exist like that. So when it says, look also at the 5 aggregates, so it's not only that we acknowledge as though the self exists objectively, but we also grasp to this self, and the basis of designation of the 5 aggregates, they also do not exist by their own side inherently in an objective way. So the 5 aggregates, they are existent only in dependence on causes, conditions, and independence on labeling. But still, they appear to our mind as though they exist objectively. So these are the things which we should acknowledge when we think about the lack of self, emptiness, in relation to the Heart Sutra, which is there is no eye, no ear, no nose, no tongue, etc. So this is the negation of things that exist from their own side inherently. And we acknowledge the fact that things do not exist as they appear. So the Buddha Bhagavan taught this in the Mother Sutras, but not only in these sutras, but also in the Pratimoksha literature of the self-liberation. And the Buddha said in these sutras that the appearance of the Buddhas in our world is dependent on emptiness, the way things truly exist. So the appearance of Buddhas is also completely dependent on emptiness. So we want to analyze the nature of things, as we said, not to be satisfied only with their appearance, but to go beyond it, and when we should analyze one particular thing and see that it doesn't exist inherently, it doesn't exist objectively. So this is what the Buddha taught. It is not that he invented something new that was not existent before and just connected it to things, but rather he described the way things truly exist. So, as we said, when we investigate things or phenomena, they exist independent on causes and conditions, on mere labeling, and even though they appear as though they exist, the phenomena exist objectively, they do not exist in this way, but only in dependence on other things. But when we investigate the way that the mind reacts to things as though they appear, as though they exist inherently, so there's an appearance of things that arises in the mind, and then the mind completely grasps to this appearance, and then because of that, anger arises or attachment arises. But when we start to acknowledge the way phenomena really exist, for example, when we check the object of our anger, what are we angry about? What do we have desire for? Then we see that the anger, the desire, and the other reflective emotions, they see a particular object that seems to these minds as though it exists objectively, inherently as good or bad, appealing or unappealing. And when we analyze the nature of this phenomena, and we see that they do not exist in such an objective way, so even if we haven't realized it, if we haven't understood it thoroughly, still this investigation and the beginning of seeing things that they do not exist as they appear to us, then it lessens the intensity of the afflictive emotions. And at a certain point, when we get a better understanding, and even and to a degree where we realize that things do not exist as they appear, that is when we will be able to stop our afflictions that arise from this grasping, from the attachment to things as though they exist truly from the side of the phenomena. So when we analyze the way that our mind grasps to the self, so myself, I being the user of particular things, also I do not exist objectively by my own power. So also the things which I use, also they do not exist objectively. And by this, we begin to stop not only the grasping at objectivity, but also the afflictive emotions that arise from this attachment to an objective existence.
그래서 بعצם משה
So as the Mahamudra text, which we will start to study soon, the text says, this is the Mahamudra, this is the view of the middle way. So when the Heart Sutra says independence of the perfection of wisdom, all the beings have come to the perfection of wisdom. So all the future Buddhas will attain Buddhahood, independence, and the perfection of wisdom. So this is not done by belief or by prayers or just by aspiring to, but rather independence on wisdom, on the perfection of wisdom. That is how Buddhahood is attained. So also in the ornament to the Mahayana Sutra, this is also mentioned there. Where it is said that we need to go through a way, a path of progressing and developing the wisdom which will finally bring to the fulfillment of Buddhahood. So the way this sutra, the path it shows us is to first we need to listen or to study. And the next stage that we need to do is contemplation. So, and the last stage is to develop our own meditation. So this is the way that the Sutra Alamkara shows us. First we need to study and listen to a specific subject, and then contemplate and have a particular wisdom relating to this subject, and then later on we should, having contemplated, we should meditate and to have correct assumptions. Having arrived to these correct assumptions, we take it into our own meditation and meditate about it time after time. So in the process of meditation, we come to a certainty as to our correct assumption. And in this process, we can get rid of the obscurations and all our own accomplishments, our future accomplishments will be attained on the basis of study, contemplation and meditation. So the wisdom is a critical part of this process. So, for example, Rinpoche says that if we imagine 10 or 15 blind people who want to go from one place to the other, they will have to rely on one person who will lead them there, someone who will show them the way, someone who will lead them. So in the same way, there are all the other practices that are explained on the method, from the method point of view. They need the wisdom to lead them to Buddhahood. So we practice many things on the method. Many great practices like generosity, morality, patience, and the other perfections. In order for these practices to go to Buddhahood, they need the guidance of the wisdom. And this is what Shantideva said in engaging in the Bodhisattva way of life in the 9th chapter. He said that all these branches were taught in order to generate wisdom. So all the things that were taught previously were aimed in order to generate this wisdom. So when Shantideva composed this text, he taught, for example, in the 6th chapter, patience, and later on the morality, and the way that we need to generate enthusiastic effort. So all the things that Shantideva wrote until chapter 9 were written in order to generate wisdom, which is what will allow us, that is what will allow us to get eventually to wisdom by the other practices. So the wisdom which we're dealing with is the wisdom of the selflessness of person and phenomenon. So returning to the explanation of Jamini Sheba, that is the way to meditate on the view of selflessness. So as we said yesterday, he starts with identifying the object of negation. We said we want to verify what is this self that doesn't exist in reality, but the mind still appears. The mind still grasps to it exists, as though it exists like that. So there are 4 points for this negation, which is recognizing the object of negation. There is the investigation of whether this recognizing the I is is everything comprised in it, or are some things not within this investigation? And then there's also the reasoning that we use in order to investigate. We want to make sure that the investigation that we use is correct, and also by using these explanations, we want to check whether we are able to negate the object of negation by checking if the self exists as one, the same, or as different. So in order to explain this, Jamin Shiva says, as we spoke about yesterday, the self grasps to the self as though it exists by its own power, from its own side, with indivisibility, as though the self exists as indivisible from body and mind. The mind grasps to the self that exists by its own power. So if a self can really exist by its own power on the basis of a body and mind that are indivisible, like milk and water, so we can check whether this self exists as one or as different, as the same or as distinct. In general, when we divide all phenomena, we can divide it into different categories. One way of doing it is to check whether things are one phenomena, the same, or are they different? One or different, the same or different. There is nothing that isn't that doesn't go into this division, either one or different or distinct. So if the self exists by its own power, if it exists on the basis of the body and mind, which are one unit, so that means that it exists truly. If it exists truly, it should exist truly as one or as different, either one or distinct. When we check if it exists as one or distinct, and we find that if it were truly existent, it couldn't be one and it couldn't be distinct, since there is no other option, then it must be a self that doesn't exist truly. So that it says in English, if based on the body and mind being inseparable, like water mixing with milk, there exists I that is capable of existing in and of itself, it has to be either one or distinct. If it does not exist as either one or distinct, it necessarily does not exist.
אז הוא חייב להיות אחד, או יכול להיות נבדל. אם הוא לא מתקיים כאחד, הוא לא מתקיים כנבדל, אז מאחר ואין אף אופציה שלילית לקיום כזה, אז הוא לא מתקיים בכלל.
So we want to make sure that we begin this investigation by first repeating how the self appears to us. This is what we rely on when we say, when we check how the self appears to us. So we want to identify the appearance of the self precisely. So we want to have clear this appearance and the grasping to it. We see that we exist not inherently by my own power. That's how it seems to us. So this is what we want to investigate. Do I really exist in this way? So when we think about it, do I exist in an objective way that does not rely on causes and conditions? So Jameng Shepa has offered us a systematic way of analyzing. Do I exist as one or as different? If I, who exist in an objective way, which is independent, it needs to be one with the aggregates or different, distinct from the aggregates. The aggregates, as we mentioned before, as human beings, we have 5 aggregates. We have the body aggregate, the form aggregate. It's the physical aggregate. We have sensations, feelings, discrimination aggregate, the non-associated compositional factor aggregate, and that's the main mind, and the last one is the main mind aggregate. So if the self that exists by its own power objectively, if it exists like that, let's check whether it is the same. Is it one with the aggregates? If it were one with the aggregates, it could be either one with the aggregates of the body or one with the aggregates of mind. So when we check this, in general, if the self that exists objectively is one with the aggregates, so then there are absurd absurd consequences.
מסיקים מסקנה אבסורדית שאפשר להגיע אליה. אם הוא יתקיים בתור אחד עם המצוות,
If the self were one with the aggregates, so since there are 5 aggregates, there would be 5 eyes. This is an absurd consequence. Or another absurd consequence that we can get to is that since the objective eye is one with the aggregates, so since there is one self, there would also be one aggregate. There wouldn't be 5 aggregates, but rather the 5 aggregates would become one. So by this investigation and analysis, and by coming to absurd consequences, we can negate the I of existing objectively as one with the aggregates. So if we begin investigating the aggregates in a specific way, for example, is the I that exists objectively by its own power is one with the aggregate, the form aggregate, the body. So if it were one with the form aggregate, we would also get to an absurd consequence, because also in this current life, I have been born to a mother. I have a body that came from my mother's womb, and at the end of this life, my body will be left behind or thrown away. So if I am one with this body aggregate, that means that at the end of this life, the self will also be left behind. It will be thrown away. That means that the I that is not something that we have throughout our lifetimes, but is something which is temporary. I myself was born this life and will be left behind at the end of this life, because it is one with the body. This is another absurd consequence. So if we ask ourselves, is this I one with the mind aggregates? So there are other absurd consequences which we can get to. For example, if the I is one with the mind, so what about feelings of cold and hunger and others? These feelings could not arise if I were one with my mind. So by such explanations, we can get to the understanding that the self that exists objectively cannot be one with the aggregates, one with the form aggregate, the body, and not with the aggregates of mind. So then, therefore, we can negate the self as being one with the aggregates. So here investigating this point of view from the Madhyamika Prasangika view. Of course there are other schools of thought, but in this precise way that we're dealing with at the moment, this is only according to the Prasangika Madhyamika. So now we're taking a particular mode of existence. So this is when we're checking a particular phenomenon. There are only two options for its existence. If we negate these two options, then we come to the conclusion that since there is no other way of existing, and if there is no third option of existence, so it cannot exist. So what we're checking according to this logic is whether this self, which appears to the mind in a particular way, self that it appears to exist from its own side, in a way that is independent by its own power, inherently, that still exists independence on the indivisibility of the body and mind, like water and milk. So how does it exist truly? If it exists truly, it is either one with the aggregates or different than the aggregates. There is no third option. So we have checked in a concise way, is the self that exists in an independent way, is it one with the aggregates? It can't be one with the aggregates because there are absurd consequences. So then the other question is it different from the aggregates? If the self is, if an independent self is distinct from the aggregates, then it needs to exist in a way that has got no connection to these aggregates. So first we need to say that the self is distinct from the aggregates. It is distinct from them by name and is distinct also by meaning. So the self is distinct from the aggregates, but then the question is whether a self that exists by its own power from its own side, could it be linked to the could it exist as distinct from the aggregates? So here Jamyang Sheba gives us a few absurd consequences that we can get to if it really exists in that way. If the self that exists by its own power in an objective way is distinct from the aggregates, then it would mean that, for example, if something harms the aggregates, the self will not be harmed. If there is a sickness or pain, if there is something that damages them, the aggregates, then it will not affect the I will not feel harmed, I will not feel pain, because the self is something which is independent of the aggregates. So in the same way we can say that when I suffer, I am in pain, I am miserable, I am sad, etc. So these feelings will not have any connection to the aggregates of body and mind. These feelings will have no connection to the aggregates. So if I am miserable, this self that will have no connection to the aggregates, so these feelings will not be linked to the body or mind. So these are absurd consequences that we can get to. if the self exists objectively from its own side, which is different from the aggregates. So in order to summarize this very precise analysis that Jamin Shepa offered us, then we analyze whether the self exists in an objective way independently. And if it can exist in this way, if it exists in this way, it is either the same or different from the aggregates. There is no third option. And since we negated of it being the same as and different of the aggregates, since there is no third option, so then a self that exists objectively, independently, cannot exist and doesn't. But what does exist? Exists a self that is dependent. A self which is dependent on labeling. It is labeled by a conventional mind on mere name. A self like that does exist. The fact that is independent does not exist. So now we're going to the toilet. We're going to start with the questions. So there are a few notes with questions, but Yaki wants to Yaki just wants to correct something that he said before. I said that the fourth aggregate was non-associated compositional factors, but it is compositional factors. So Rinpoche actually would like to continue teaching us a couple of things, and then we will go on to the questions. Jamyang Shepa explains here the way that we should investigate the object of negation. Then, so first we need to identify it and then see whether it has got all, it comprises of all the aspects of logic. And then we check whether the logic that we're using is correct. Is this, and then whether this object of negation is one or different from what appears to us, and then the last is to see whether it is the same or different. So there are many different kinds of logic that we should use in order to see whether this self that appears to us seems to appear from its own side, by its own nature. Does it exist the way it appears, whether it is one, different? So there are different kinds of logic that we can use. And when we do this investigation, so the mind reacts in a particular way. It could be that based on previous lives, that we have become habituated to this kind of analysis. We have already got imprints on our continuum of mind, and it could be that because of these imprints, which are powerful, when we realize that the I, which appears to mind independently, cannot be found in the basis of designation, could be that great joy will arise in our minds. So this happiness and joy that arises in the mind is linked to previous imprints, which are on our mind from previous lives. But it could be that also that if our imprints are not so powerful, it could be that when we realize that the self that exists by the self that appears to exist by its own power doesn't exist, it could be that great fear will arise. So when we feel that the I completely disintegrates, then great fear will arise in our mind. So not finding the self can result in different sensations in the mind. So it can be fear or fright, but we want again and again to habituate the mind to when we search for the I in the basis of designation, it cannot be found. So in this process of analysis, we use logic, we use reasoning. For example, I do not exist from my own side because I do not exist as one or many. Or in other logics, I do not exist from my own side because I do not exist as one or different, distinct. And Rinpoche also quoted a verse that's taken from the writings that says that when we investigate the self in this way, we eventually come to a conclusion that I exist as a mere label, as a reflection. I do not exist by my own power, but like a reflection. So we come to a conclusion that the appearance of the I, as it appears in our mind, innately appears as though it just kind of floats in the air, and there is nothing which is connected to it, which it depends on. It seems as though it exists by its own power. So this self does not exist. So Jaming Shepa says in this text, having clearly ascertained through analysis the non-existence of an I, which exists by itself, the way the Dharmata is proven by a reasoned inference, when any awareness of joy or of fear arises, it is called initially finding the view of the middle way.
באמצעות תודעה שהיא תודעה עסקית. וכאשר אנחנו מוכיחים את זה באמצעות תודעה שהיא תודעה עסקית, וזה בעצם שלב שאנחנו רוצים להגיע אליו, שבה הבנו בצורה נכונה, שבה שהעצמי, שהוא בלתי תלוי, הוא לא מתקיים. אנחנו מבינים את זה עם תודעה שהיא תודעה עסקית, משתמשת בדיוקים ולוגיקה, אז יכול להיות כמו שג'אמינג שבא אומר, שבהתחלה תחושה של או הנאה או שמחה מהבט,
So this stage is called the initial finding of the middle way. This is where we want to get to. So we set a kind of progress, a line of progress. We want to progress on the Madhyamika view. And this initial stage where we have found the view according to the Madhyamika is when we arise in our mind this inferential cognizer, which is based on analysis, on investigation, which sees clearly that the self that seems to appear by its own power does not exist. So when we come to the conclusion in the meditation process, that this, while investigating how the I exist, when we come to the conclusion that it doesn't exist, so we want to keep practicing in this method. So we do the process of meditation in the beginning with study, then with contemplation, and then during the meditation we habituate the mind and practice time and again on this point. And in this process we combine prayers and supplications, aspirations to develop this middle way view. So we pray and supplicate the Lama and the lineage in order to engage in an active way and productive in this view. And then finally we come to the conclusion that the I that has not been found in this process, it exists only on mere labeling. It is dependent only on mere name, label, independence on other things. So as we continue in this process and the mind becomes more and more habituated with a lack of self which is independent, that exists from its own side by its own nature, so our mental afflictions of attachment and the others will lose their power. So this view, as it was taught here, is not something which was invented by Tibetan scholars. It is not something that our tradition has invented something new, but it is something that can be found in the root of the Indian scholars like JHADO Rakshita, which composed the ornament of the middle way that he spoke about investigating the I. So in this investigation, do I exist in a dependent or an independent way? Do I exist as one, as the same, or as different? As one or as many? So finally we come to the conclusion that it doesn't exist like that, but rather it exists like a reflection. This is what JHADO Rakshita said in his text. So there are different methods, different logics and reasoning that we can use in order to investigate whether the I that appears to us in a particular way is disappearance. Does disappearance exist truly? So when we look through at it from the point of view of the three doors of liberation, so we check a particular phenomenon to see whether it exists from its own side, by its own power, by checking its nature, its causes, and its results. So these are the three things that we should check: the nature, the causes, and the results. So from the point of view of the nature of a particular phenomenon, we ask ourselves whether this phenomenon is one or different or distinct. Is it one or many? So as for the results, we check a method of the Vajra sliver, like different parts of a diamond. So this is the way we check the results, to see that things do not exist from by their own power. And as for investigating the causes, we check whether there's inherent production to things or things created by themselves, from others, from themselves or others, or are they created without causes at all? So from self, from other, from both, or causeless production. So when we investigate a particular phenomenon, so as we said, we can check the three doors of liberation: the nature, the causes, and the results. Or as in the Tantra of Goya Samaja, it is said that we can check the existence of a particular phenomenon by the four extremes of existence. Do things exist in an ultimate way, in a final way, in a conventional way, Do they exist ultimately and conventionally? Or do they not exist neither in a conventional or in an ultimate way? This is one commentary for this way of investigation. Do they exist ultimately, conventionally, both ultimately, conventionally, neither conventionally, or not ultimately? So in any way, Rinpoche says that we have here two options. Is a phenomenon that appears in our mind as though it exists independently of causes. Can it exist independently of causes? Or another option is that it's dependent on causes and conditions. Is it dependent or independent? That's a summary. There are only two options, and it's not only just two options, but they also contradict directly each other. They're either dependent or they're independent. So when we check whether the I that appears in our mind as existing as a phenomenon that exists from its own side, by its own power, etc., does it exist as something that depends on causes, or is it independent of causes? If we have negated it being independently, so then they are the last option. The only option is that it is dependent on causes. So this is the process that we do in this investigation, and when we do it, we want to make sure that it is not something that our teachers here have made up. It wasn't made up in Tibet. It has a source in the Indian tradition, and this gives it even a heavier weight. So the way that Jameng Shepa explained, we can think, this is what Jameng Shepa said, is a teacher who came from the Gelug tradition. This is what he says, but we have different opinion. But if we think it's only just Jameng Shepa, but actually it's based on the Nalanda tradition in India, so that it gives it it grounds the view even stronger. In the Heart Sutra, it says, that is something that Rinpoche mentioned in the weekend course. It says in the first verse, thus have I heard one time, the Blessed One was dwelling in the profound illumination. This term is what? So this in Tibetan means Samo and Nangwa. Samo is profound, Nangwa is illumination. But actually what Nangwa means in Tibetan is not only something which is not illumination, but is also an appearance. So if we change the translation, instead of being profound illumination, it will be profound appearance. By changing the translation, I'm not saying that it is mistaken, just that there are different interpretations for the word, for the Nangwa and Sangwa. So Rinpoche said that in his life he has heard different explanations for the Heart Sutra, and there are some interpretations that he still hasn't studied or read, but only about this this term profound illumination or appearance. Rinpoche hasn't seen an interpretation which is very vast for only these two words in the context of the Heart Sutra. When the Dalai Lama explained this term, it worked for Rinpoche. There was a specific point in this explanation of His Holiness that for Rinpoche was very relevant and powerful. So he said that His Holiness said that when we look at this profound, at this word of illumination, nangwa, or appearance, it means a dependent arising actually. So here we have the one, the sangwa, the profound, the deep, which means that any phenomenon does not exist from its own side. It is empty from its own nature, and the appearance is dependent arising. So these two things go together, emptiness and appearance. Emptiness from the phenomena existing from its own side, and the appearance of dependent arising, and the unification of these two, of emptiness and appearance, is not only this combination that can be spoken about in the Heart Sutra, but also in different traditions deal with this combination of appearance and emptiness. For example, there is another tradition that calls it Rik and Dong. Rik is knowing, and Dong is emptiness. Rik, the knowing, is a different word for dependent arising. Another tradition calls it Kadang, which is purity, and Lundrup is a something spontaneous. So Kadam is the emptiness, Lundrup, spontaneity is the dependent arising. There is a vast world of phenomena that exist independent on other things, and we can investigate them and come to the conclusion that they come into existence independence. So this is the meaning as well of the Mahamudra. So we speak a lot about non-finding a particular object while searching for it. But we do not only want to be satisfied with saying that when we search for it we cannot find it. What we want to really understand is that when we search for something that exists independently, this thing does not exist. We do not find the independent thing. And if we manage to understand this negation of an independent existence, then we can relate it to the way that things do come into existence, independence on causes and conditions, etc. Because we can say that this issue has got two different sides, because things are empty, that are empty from independent existence. They exist in dependence on causes and conditions, and because they exist dependently on causes and conditions, they are empty of independent existence. So these two things go side by side. The appearance appears to us, and this appearance is dependent arising. It can appear because phenomena is empty from its own side, and because things are empty from their own side, the appearance exists. So, Lama Tsongkhapa said in the three principal aspects of the path,
של הדרך. הוא אמר בבית מספר 12,
in the 12th verse,
סיום הניתוח של ההשקפה הנכונה,
which is
if these two realizations are happening simultaneously without alternation, and for many merely seeing dependent relation is completely unbetraying, the definite ascertainment comes that completely destroys the way all objects are apprehended as truly existent. At that time, the analysis of the ultimate view is complete. אז למה צונקפה דיבר על
so Lama Tsongkhapa wrote the way we can hold these two aspects, the aspect of emptiness and the aspect of dependent arising. So when we can see that they do not negate each other, but also seeing them supports each other. Just by merely seeing dependent relation, like Lama Tsongkhapa writes, it cannot be negated. It doesn't lead us astray. So we can see that phenomena arise independently, and only seeing this can get rid of the independent, seeing things as existing independently from the phenomenon's own side. And Rinpoche said in the same way, it works in the opposite way. When we see that things do not exist by their own nature as independent, so this seeing helps us to understand that phenomena exist only in dependence. This is what Lama Tsongkhapa said in the three principal aspects of the path. And Rinpoche said that when we take this into our meditation process, we can see it as a kind of metaphor, like when seeing the reflection of a moon in a lake. So we will not need someone standing behind us and tell us that to make sure that it is not a true moon in the lake. We will know that it's not a true moon. So we won't need anyone to tell us. In the same way, if we ask ourselves, what is the meaning of this metaphor? There's an appearance of phenomena that appears to our mind, and it seems, and this phenomenon seems to appear from its own side, by its own power, inherently. So this appearance has arisen. We cannot stop this appearance. Just like the reflection, just like the reflection of the moon in the lake. Even when we know that it's only a reflection, the reflection will still appear. This is not what we want to get rid of. What we want to get rid of is the clinging of the existence as the appearance, as